And welcome back here to Open. Daren Jaime here with you, and we are so glad to have you sharing as we continue to talk about COVID-19 and exactly how it affects New Yorkers in a variety of different ways. We talk about health, we talk about wellness, but then we also talk about families. And one of the things that happens during this COVID-19 is that sometimes the families of those who've been infected are really affected in a dramatic way. And so here to tell a little bit more about some of the resources that are available to families, particularly by way of law, is none other than Patrick J. Boyd. He's the founding partner of the Boyd Law Group. And we thank you so much for joining us, Patrick, for being here on Open.
Thank you for letting me participate today.
Oh, no, it's great to have you. And I think it's important that we, have this conversation, particularly for New Yorkers, because as we know, so many people are being adversely affected by corona. And I use the terminology that you're either infected or you're affected. And all of us have been affected, right? But I want to get down to family members of affected people because sometimes in order to deal, you got to be in quarantine or, you're going to have to care for your loved one. And I know that when it comes to sick leave, let's talk a little bit about that because there is some sick leave and there's also the paid family medical leave. Can you share a little bit about that?
Of course. So certainly the government has passed a series of laws to help people dealing with the virus, and as you say, people helping their families in coping with the virus. There are two primary opportunities for relief under what's called the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. And I'll give you two basic examples. First, if you happen to be sick with the virus or quarantined because you suspect you might be sick with the virus, there's an opportunity to apply for and receive leave up to 2 weeks or 80 hours, if you will, of full paid leave so that you can either heal if you're ill or at least make sure you quarantine yourself and don't get other people sick if you're carrying the virus but not showing symptoms yet, right? So that's one element for you personally if you as an employee are sick. As a secondary item, which is equally important, let's say you have a family member who's sick or under quarantine, or a school-age child who has to stay home, who can't go to school because of the virus. In that case, there are 80 hours available of leave for you to help care for a quarantined family member or to help care for that sick child at 2/3 pay. These are two meaningful amounts of time where you get paid either in full or at 2/3 pay for caring for yourself or quarantining yourself or caring for others who are under quarantine or just caring for your family for that matter.
Mm-hmm. And that's what's so important. It's so vital because I think that a lot of people just have these questions about it. How are employers really responding? What are we getting from, are you hearing that employers are really being sympathetic? Because I know we hear sometimes of some of the challenges, but how are employers responding during this time?
I think there's a fair amount of receptivity to the need for leave out there in the employer community. I would say right now that that's probably easier because you're not dealing with a whole lot of workers, right? You're still dealing with a situation where a lot of non-essential workers aren't necessarily going to work. And so the idea isn't as challenging as it might be when there comes a situation where some of us are going back to work and are sick, or some of us are going to back to work and some of us can't. I think that the vast majority of the problems, though, are because of a lack of understanding of the law and not necessarily because an employer is out there to try and punish somebody or whatever. To be honest about it, though, an employee can be impacted equally by an employer uninformed about the law or an employer who's being not understanding enough of the law. So it's important for them to understand it. Check out their rights, go online and look at the government resources available to make sure they understand. But the fundamental concept is, at a minimum, if you have the virus or if you have a family infected by the virus, you should be able to expect at least 2 weeks of paid leave, right? Either depending upon 2/3 pay or full pay, depending upon your certain circumstance, whether it's you sick or you just helping to care for your family.
Yeah, I want great point there too. Talk to me about the CARES Act because we hear a lot about that. And some people aren't so familiar with that. So give a brief overview, if you will. What exactly is the CARES Act and how are people taking part?
Sure. It's a new federal law, which is actually probably going to be boosted by more monetary funding this week. It looks like the Democrats and Republicans are agreeing upon that as early as today. But primarily two elements to the CARES Act that are important. First, for small businesses, there's a funding if they choose to keep employees on payroll. They're eligible to apply for 2.5 months worth of expenses associated with payroll and overhead and that kind of thing. So this is an incentive to employers to keep employees on payroll, to keep employees getting paid, and even if they're not working, to make sure that they're going to be working to the extent that they can, and then available to come right back to work, because the government is going to cover some of the costs of keeping those employees on payroll. The government's going to loan the money to the businesses, and the businesses are required to use that money and will be required to demonstrate that money is used for payroll, not for something else. So that's an important component. Secondarily, there is a meaningful boost to the unemployment entitlements for people filing for unemployment. A couple of things on that. First, if you file for unemployment, you're supposed to get it like in a snap. It's supposed to happen within days. It used to take quite some time to get unemployment. The government has kicked that requirement and really sped things up. And I don't think they've gotten that perfected yet, but it's made great changes in how quickly that's happened in the short term now. In addition, unemployment is now extended from 26 weeks that you can receive unemployment to 39 weeks. So a longer period of time for that entitlement to unemployment if you lose your job, right? And also a boost in the amount of unemployment you get by $600 a week. So whatever you were going to be eligible for unemployment, you're now going to get up to $600 more per week for that unemployment when you file. So if you lose a job, as they're saying, 20% of the population is now going to lose their jobs. If you lose that job, and I think in New York, that's going to be a very high, much higher number. I think you would probably agree, right? If you lose that job, you have the ability to file for unemployment quickly and to receive that benefit of $600 or more per week for up to 39 weeks, which should provide not a luxury, but at least a necessity of income for people who lost a job through no fault of their own, which is certainly an important benefit.
Yeah, and it's sad, but so many New Yorkers are really filing for something. It's unemployment. It's that paid leave. It's the family's leave. Everybody needs these resources, right? Because particularly here, being in the epicenter of what's going on, it's also important for people to be able to tap in. I did want to talk a little bit more about the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act, because there's another act that's out there as well. And so many acts, right? But it's great that there's this amount of help that's out there and available to people. So give people an overview about this one as well.
Well, so we were talking about that Families First before. I think the one thing that perhaps I didn't mention when we talk about it to start with is just that the eligibility is going to be contingent upon the size of your employer, right? And it's also going to be contingent upon an important component, which, to be honest, the law is still evolving on this because these are new statutes, right? But the eligibility is going to be something that we have to figure out practically if you're capable of teleworking. So for particular people who maybe have a job where they're required to be in a factory or on a floor setting or in the field, it's very easy to understand that benefit of those 2 weeks of pay is going to be available. But for those people who might be clerical workers, who have the capacity to telework, that benefit's not going to be available unless you can really show that you can't telework from your job. And that's an important component just to consider in terms of how people are going to get the benefit and not. I think it's concerning to a certain extent for those people who might have jobs that are jobs that they could telework from, but maybe don't have the resources, maybe don't have that computer, maybe don't have that iPad, maybe don't have that technology for teleworking. And how that's going to play out, I don't know, and I don't think we know yet in terms of what's going to happen.
Yeah, so much to pay attention to. But one thing that we can look at with very, a good lens is the fact that this is disproportionately affecting communities of color. And that plays out in a lot of different ways. And I know you have some thoughts and some things you would say towards that.
Yeah, well, for sure. I think there's two groups that have to be particularly vigilant at this particular point in time. It would seem the African American community, most of the scientific data is showing that they're adversely impacted by this virus, which is concerning in and of itself. And then the Asian American community and the Asian community, where certainly there has been some discriminatory animus directed towards Chinese and the Chinese government by virtue of this whole virus. I think the most important thing to say on that score is the following. I would love to say, and I'm sure you would love to say, that everybody's going to do everything they can to get along and be fair and be reasonable. But racism doesn't disappear because of COVID-19. Sexism doesn't disappear because of COVID-19. And all those types of discriminatory things that people have faced in the workforce, they might still face. And what's most important, I think, is that workers don't forget that their civil rights are still intact and still available. If you feel that you were let go because you were pregnant, or because you were African American, or because you were Asian and traveled to another country and your employer just didn't want you back in the office as opposed to somebody else, there are laws that have been here since at least 1964 that are designed to protect you. And the employer can't say, oh, well, COVID-19, so I'm letting you go. That's not good enough. Those civil rights protections do not disappear for workers, and workers shouldn't think they're just getting along, and should just get along by forgetting to consider their rights and their opportunities as members of protected communities if they're let go, or if they lose their jobs, or if they lose their jobs and realize that the people who kept their jobs are all Caucasian or all non-Asian or any of those sort of things. So I've heard a lot of concern, in particular in our firm, with calls from pregnant women who say, well, maybe the employer is just trying to look out for me because I have a baby and they want me to be healthy and they're worried about me. And I understand that, but pregnant women need jobs.
Right.
Need jobs perhaps as much, if not more, than a lot of people because they've got a new baby on the way. So I hope that people will get along, but I hope that people won't forget that those rights and opportunities that they have as part of the civil rights laws of this great country, don't think that those rights disappear, or don't think that they have to minimize those rights just because they need to get along in this particular society. It's going to be very important that we push for those rights and opportunities for people now, where it might be easy to marginalize that issue because you just all want to get along in this difficult time.
Right. Patrick J. Boyd, who's the founding partner of the the Boyd Law Group. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing with us here today. A lot of helpful information. Hopefully, we got your information at the bottom of the screen that New Yorkers can be able to tap in a time such as this. Thank you for the great work that you're doing and keeping us aware. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Take care of you and yours.
All right. Patrick J. Boyd of the Boyd Law Group. Stay with us. We've got more open. We're coming right back right after this.